And we turn to our top story of Donald Trump's tariffs to take forward the conversation. Joining me is Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, former senior diplomat. Good evening and welcome, sir. We're also expecting Dr. Gautam Sen from London School of Economics to join us in a bit. Ambassador Puri, first learn about, is there clarity on what Donald Trump is seeking to achieve with these tariffs? Given that the reasons vary from trade deficits to political ties and friendships to the Ukraine war, what is your take on it, sir?
Vendu, thank you very much. In some senses, $1 million question. But let's start from the beginning. This tariffs thing began a long time back, a few months into his presidency. You know, let me say it's part of his MAGA outlook. They want to make America great again, and they somehow or the other think that one way of making America great is to make others look down. Tariffs is a word which, in a sense, in America has got internalized as America's ability to punish, rather than being seen in the normal way that this is what Americans would have to pay for import of goods which they are using and which they are happy to use because they're coming at competitive price. So that's one side of it. If you remember, the original tariff number for India was 26%. Now, we have been further saddled with this Russian penalty. Now, the Americans knew we were importing oil from Russia. The Americans themselves are importing uranium and several other things. The Europeans are importing Russian oil. They knew this. But look, this is the geopolitics and the way things are going. Mr. Trump needs to show to his people that he's being very strong in being able to end the war, I will say so in the first place, but also to show that it's America which dictates how the war ends. I'm talking about the Ukraine conflict.
Right.
Meeting President Putin, hopefully shortly, maybe there's some kind of outcome, difficult to predict, between two leaders who are all in it by themselves and take their own views on the matter. But I am glad to say that, you know, we are looking at it in a matured manner. Yes, we have 25 plus 25% tariffs on our goods. To say that these don't hurt, that's wrong. But to say that they will hurt tremendously, that's also exaggeration. But a good relationship with America, a good economic relationship with America, a good political relationship with America is useful for India and important for India, even geostrategically. And so, you know, we are trying to see what we can do in terms of the negotiations towards the end of this month, what is possible, but also gearing ourselves to the fact that, look, the Americans are going to levy a certain amount of tariffs. Some particular industries, pharmaceuticals, textiles, etc., the jewelry, these things are going to be hit. But, you know, let's see what we can make out of it. Let's try and get better clarity, maybe towards the end of the month or in the month's time.
Right. Let's look at the bigger picture for a moment of India-US ties. It had a very positive momentum in the recent years. Perhaps the expectations were greater with the Trump administration. But do you think this tariff issue is pushing the relations in a different direction? Or am I reading too much into it, sir?
Vendu, let me rewind a little bit. Look, our expectations of Mr. Trump when he came back were mostly guided by Trump 1.1, 1.0, where we thought we had developed a good relationship. We'd carried it through the Biden era, but there were always the little pinpricks from the Democrats talking about domestic things in India. We thought those would end with Mr. Trump. But I think we must accept that there is a change in Trump 2.0. This is not an accidental presidentship surrounded by institutionalists who may be nationalists like generals, etc. This is surrounded by ideologues. There is an element of racism in all of this. And this entire business of MAGA is to the forefront. And whether we like it or not, while we may be very happy to see a few people of Indian origin in the Trump administration, CEOs, etc., the fact is you come in their eye, and in their quest to make America great again, they think the other alternative is to make all others a little down. So I'm afraid, you know, all those who are batting very strongly for America now are having to find themselves batting on the back foot. They're still doing a very good job, and I'm glad that we are looking at it in a matured manner, because a good and a useful relationship with America is useful for us, good for us. Having said all this, let's be very clear that Trump 2.0 is much more about himself, his country, what suits that particular population, and frankly, the global issues that we talk about, etc. And
Right.
I want to make one point to you, this thing about China, which we think was a kind of tipping point, the US to tip in the direction of India and leave out China. He may just be thinking very differently. He may think that, China is the other big global hegemon. I make a deal with China, and look where I am at the top of the global ladder. The two big guys have made a deal. Well, that's something those who've been analyzing all this have been saying right from the beginning of Trump 2.0. We need to be mindful of all that.
Right. Let me here also welcome Dr. Gautam Sen, economist with London School of Economics. He's joining us live from London. Dr. Sen, good evening and welcome. Given so many variables at play, let me put a simple question. If you could help us first understand the impact of Trump's tariffs on India, what are the sectors you see perhaps will bear greater brunt?
I think gems and jewelry for sure, clothing, but so far he has exempted electronics and pharmaceuticals. But then subsequently he has said he might apply 100% duty on pharma, and he wants it to be returned to the United States. Now, you see, the issue is this. Nothing unusual has happened to India. He has done worse to his closest allies, Canada, Mexico, Republic of Korea, Japan. So actually nothing has happened to India that should be regarded as a trajectory in its own right. I would also suggest what is happening really is to do with Trump and not the United States, because hardly anybody that I'm listening to in the United States, hardly any professional is able to grasp what he is doing, because the economics is haywire and the economics is inimical to America's short, medium-term and long-term interests. And the consequences will unfold very shortly. You see, the American deficit of 1 trillion is equal almost exactly to its fiscal deficit. That is the reason why the United States has a deficit, not because of unfair trade practices. Yes, there are unfair trade practices, particularly where China is concerned, but that is really a minor part of the larger picture. Now, we in India, I will say two things. One, we have to treat this like a natural calamity, like COVID, something totally unexpected, which we have to deal with. I was vastly reassured to hear the former principal economic advisor to the Ministry of Commerce, Rupa Datta, who was outlining a series of measures being contemplated. I'm afraid this is the best we can do. The government of India seems to have understood what it has to do, and we hope the worst will pass, because the US will itself begin to suffer. 80% of all the tariff revenue has been paid by US consumers. It is huge, and it may mitigate his big and beautiful budget deficit, but the United States will not be happy. And if he imposes major tariffs on pharmaceuticals, it will affect a huge swathe of the population. I would have thought it will affect 75 to 80% of all Americans,
Right.
and they will not be well pleased. I am almost certain Trump, who keeps changing his mind every other day, will find a reason for changing course.
Okay,
We
Dr.
need
Sen,
to hold fast.
that point, staying with your analogy of comparing the Trump tariffs with the pandemic, what is the cost that the Americans, the ordinary Americans, will have to pay for this tariff, if you could help us understand?
Well, as I just said, 80% of the tariffs have been collected from American consumers. This will shortly be reflected in prices in the shops, in the rate of inflation. But Trump is not being reasonable, not just with India and trade. He is being unreasonable across the board. If you look at the way the top executive of the Labor Bureau was sacked, a person who was not responsible for the unemployment data, he accused her of fabrication, which is completely unrealistic and false. So, this is something the world is going through, the whole world, including Americans, and it is not to do with the United States. The United States was not trading with India to do it a favor. India and the United States was doing trade with each other because there was mutual benefit, as there always is with trade. Now, there are issues with regard to India. Maybe some of India's tariffs are higher than they ought to be, but India was negotiating. But how do you negotiate with a person who has changed his mind after the negotiations are complete? The EU negotiations, where he said the EU has promised him $600 billion personally to spend as he wished. And if they do not deliver, he will raise tariffs again. So how do you negotiate with the person A, where the economics makes no sense, where there is no fairness, because as Mr. Singh, Ambassador Singh has argued, they are importing from the Russians, the Europeans are importing from the Russians, and we are importing because we are a large country and we have to find the best price we can pay. I'm afraid we have to put up with this. There will be some suffering. I was thinking maybe the government of India can have a short-term fund and hope this will pass and fund stockpiles of some of the goods. Unfortunately for the United States, because the tariffs are differential, punishing India does not mean production will go to the United States. It will simply be diverted to another country. The United States will gain very little. So it is completely senseless.
Okay. Ambassador Puri, as Dr. Sen puts it, Trump is being unfair across the board. And in doing that, is he then risking long-term American strategic interest in ties on the altar of the MAGA agenda?
First of all, I'm delighted Professor Sen is here. We last met in Kathmandu, by the way. So very nice to see you here, Professor Sen.
Namaskar, namaskar. How good to see you, sir. How good to see you.
He and I learned the same economics. But President Trump apparently learned a different economics at the hands of a chap called Peter Navarro, who doesn't think that tariffs affect the home country, the country that levies it, and that country has what you may say inflationary likelihood as a result of it. Okay. Now, in the very simplistic way of thinking, when was the United States not wanting tariffs? When it was at the top of the world, it had no competitor, it felt you should have low tariffs, and it asked the whole world to do free trade. Is the United States feeling that it's not at the top of the world? Is the Chinese challenge, the challenge from other emerging economies, in some senses hurting them? I think the MAGA lot, they think that they are being hurt, and that's a fact. Will this trade, these tariffs result in people investing in America? You've seen Tim Cook present a gold kind of memento to him and saying Apple will. Well, let's see what happens. But I can't see Americans producing simple things such as dolls and Christmas presents, producing shirts, laundry, or even bananas, etc. in the near term. But you know, this is all a question of how much the American people are willing to bear. Now, in the tariffs, which of course they've paid for, in some senses, the American deficit is being settled. Now, these are complex questions. These are about theoretical economics. We can go on. But my understanding is that as of now, the Trump world, the MAGA world, is believing that levying the tariffs is showing the others their place. And the others are not just China, not just Russia, but also BRICS countries and anybody who doesn't agree with their leader. So, you know, there is this entire political issue which is being portrayed forward. How the people will react to the Christmas season, we have to wait and see. But we, I believe very strongly in India. We need to take this in a matured manner. We need to know that there is an impetuous leader who's got elected. He's got his own agendas there, but the relationship with the United States is important. Let's just try and see weather the storm, try to make it a little less powerful if we can, etc. We are trying to see if we can put up some newer things for the trade deal with the US when their team comes here. Let's try and see what best can be done. These things have negative sort of fallouts also in other ways. On the United States, that's their problem. But on us, it becomes our problem.
Right, Dr. Sen,
I would
your final thoughts.
I would like to add something. You know, I repeat again, you know, what is happening now really is to do with Trump and his team. It is not to do with the United States at large. The US and India have long-term convergence in many areas, long-term convergence in geopolitics, which we do not have in our neighborhood. In our neighborhood, we have a real issue. So I am not going to say that this is going to have a permanent impact. I think we have to sit it out. India is behaving in a very mature way. We should not be provocative, because the attempt to bring industry back to the United States will largely fail. It will be far too costly. Even pharmaceuticals from scratch will be 3 to 5 years, and they are not willing to pay the huge price. India is a very competitive producer of quality pharmaceuticals in generics and much more. So I think we need to sit this out, take some punishment, and I am sure the government has thought this through, and they are reacting in a mature way. We should not be provocative. We should not rise to the bait. Yes, we should signal, and that too the government has done. I am very impressed with the team and Mr. Modi's people.
On that note, many thanks, Dr. Gautam Sen, Ambassador Manjeev Puri, for joining us in this edition of News Hour. I'm glad you could both meet one another. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.